There was a time when buying the bigger Harley really did mean getting the better motorcycle. More torque, more road presence, more machine under you. Nobody had to explain it because the bikes proved it. But that old equation does not hit the same anymore, and a Honda Rebel is part of the reason why. Because when a bike starts easier, costs less, feels lighter, rides more often, and asks less from you every single week, it forces a hard question. Is the better bike the one that turns heads, or the one that actually keeps you riding? Stay with me until the end, because this is the kind of comparison that can change what you respect, what you ignore, and what you spend your money on next. What's happening? For a long time, the rule felt simple. Bigger engine, louder pipes, more presence, better motorcycle. That belief wasn't marketing. It was earned. Back in the day, the bikes that carried that weight also carried riders across states without hesitation. They had substance. They had character. You didn't need a spec sheet to understand what you were sitting on. You felt it the second the engine turned over. There was a time when that formula lined up perfectly with reality. Heavy bikes meant stability on long stretches. Big displacement meant torque where it mattered. That sound wasn't just noise, it was identity. You could hear a machine before you saw it and know exactly what it stood for. Riders built pride around that, not because someone told them to, but because the bikes delivered something honest. And for years, that connection held. You bought into that idea because it worked. It made sense on real roads, not just in brochures. It matched the kind of riding people actually did. Long miles, open highways, no shortcuts. That's where those machines proved themselves, over and over again. But something shifted along the way, not all at once, not loudly. Just enough that the old equation doesn't always land the same anymore. You still hear the sound, you still see the size, but what you get out of it doesn't always match what you expect going in. Look closely at how that plays out once money gets involved. The commitment starts before the first ride. Before the engine even fires, the weight is already there, not on the road on paper. The price isn't something you ignore, it's something you work around. Financing stretches longer, insurance climbs higher. You start doing the math before you even think about the first ride. That moment at the dealership feels good. No question. The bike looks right, feels right, everything lines up with what you've always known. But there's a second layer underneath that feeling. One you don't talk about much. The commitment is real and it shows up fast. You sign, and suddenly it's not just a machine. It's a responsibility. Monthly numbers, coverage decisions, quiet calculations about how often you'll need to ride it, just to make it feel worth it. Nobody says that part out loud, but it's there. You carry it with you before you even leave the lot. And once that commitment is locked in, something else starts happening. You begin to justify the decision, not because you made a mistake, but because the stakes are higher now. You want it to live up to what you believed it would be. You expect it to deliver on everything you've heard for years. That expectation doesn't stay on paper for long. It shows up the first time you have to handle the bike in the real world. If this is hitting close to home, hit like so more riders see it, subscribe for straight talk without the fluff, and share your take below. Where the weight actually shows up. Out on the highway, most bikes feel fine. Straight lines hide a lot. The real test shows up somewhere else entirely. A tight parking lot, a slow turn at an intersection, a stoplight on a slight incline. That's where weight stops being a number and turns into effort. You feel it when the bike leans just a little too far and you have to catch it. You feel it when your footing isn't perfect and you have to adjust quickly. It's not dramatic, it's subtle, but it's constant. That low-speed control demands attention every single time you ride. Balance becomes something you think about more than you expected, not because you can't handle it, but because you have to stay aware of it. Every maneuver takes just a little more input, a little more focus, a little more energy than you planned for when you first pictured yourself riding. That doesn't ruin the experience, not at all, but it changes it. It turns casual rides into something more deliberate. You don't just hop on and go without thinking. You prepare for it, even in small ways. Over time, that feeling starts shaping how often the bike actually leaves the garage. The gap between expectation and use. At the beginning, the plan is simple. You're going to ride all the time. Early mornings, late evenings, weekends that stretch into long miles. The bike isn't supposed to sit. It's supposed to move. That's the whole point. For a while, it does. The first few rides feel exactly how you imagined. The machine has presence. The road feels right. Everything lines up with the picture you had in your head before you bought it. No doubts, no hesitation. Then things settle in. Life gets busy, rides get shorter, days pass where you think about going out, but don't. Not because you don't want to ride, but because it takes a little more effort than you expected to get started. You begin to plan rides instead of just taking them. You wait for the right conditions, the right time, the right mindset. It becomes something you schedule, not something you naturally fall into. That shift is small, but it matters. The bike still means something to you. That doesn't change, but the way you interact with it starts to look different from what you originally imagined. And once that pattern sets in, it's hard to ignore what it's telling you. That's where the story really begins to turn. Two machines built with different priorities. At the core of it, these bikes are built with different intentions. One leans into tradition, into feel, into the idea that a motorcycle should remind you of its presence every second it's running. The other is built around consistency, around making the act of riding as smooth and repeatable as possible. Neither approach is wrong, but they lead to very different experiences once you start putting miles down. The traditional approach focuses on character. You get mechanical feedback. You hear and feel the engine working beneath you. Every throttle input has texture. Every shift carries a little weight. That connection is what built loyalty over decades. Riders didn't just operate those machines, they bonded with them. The modern approach goes a different direction. It aims to remove friction from the experience. The engine responds cleanly. Power delivery stays predictable. Controls feel lighter, more intuitive. The goal isn't to impress you in one moment. It's to make every ride feel easy to repeat the next day. Neither philosophy cancels the other out. They simply answer different questions. One asks how a bike feels in the moment. The other asks how it behaves over time. That difference becomes more obvious once ownership stretches beyond the first few rides. Keep that contrast in mind as the riding rhythm begins to break. When riding gets interrupted, ownership doesn't move in a straight line. It has a rhythm, and that rhythm depends on how often riding gets interrupted. Sometimes it's planned. Regular service, scheduled checks, things you expect. Other times, it shows up without warning. A part needs attention. Something doesn't feel right. The bike sits longer than you planned. The difference isn't just about what needs to be done. It's about when it happens and how predictable it feels. When everything runs on a steady cycle, you adjust without thinking. You ride, you maintain, you ride again. The flow stays intact. Riding feels like part of your routine, not something you have to work around. Unpredictability changes that. Even small interruptions can shift your mindset. You start second-guessing longer trips. You plan around the possibility of something coming up. The bike is still yours, still ready, but the certainty isn't the same. That quiet uncertainty builds over time. It's not about one issue or one delay, it's about the pattern. A machine that stays ready invites you to ride more often. A machine that feels uncertain, even occasionally, makes you pause. That pause is subtle, but it affects how you think about every ride that follows. Eventually, that shift leads to a different kind of thought, one that doesn't show up right away. The moment you think about letting it go. At some point, the idea crosses your mind. Not because something went wrong, but because you start wondering what it would take to move on. You check listings, you look at similar bikes, you get a feel for the market without fully committing to anything. What you notice first is how people respond. Some bikes attract attention immediately. Messages come in, questions are straightforward. Buyers already understand what they're looking at. The process feels smooth, almost automatic. Other times, it's different. Conversations take longer. Buyers hesitate. They ask more questions, not because they're unsure about motorcycles, but because they're unsure about that specific machine. You find yourself explaining more than you expected, clarifying things that you assumed would be obvious. That difference matters, not because one bike is better, but because one inspires immediate confidence while the other requires reassurance. Selling becomes less about the condition of the bike and more about how easily someone else can step into ownership without hesitation. Even if you decide not to sell, that experience leaves an impression. It tells you something about how the bike is perceived beyond your own garage. And once you've seen that, it's hard not to factor it into how you think about ownership moving forward. From there, attention shifts back to the one place that matters most, the road itself. What actually matters? Once you're moving. Once you're out there, everything simplifies. No paperwork, no comparisons. Just the road and the machine beneath you. That's where the real difference shows up. Not in numbers, but in how the bike behaves over time. Some machines demand more input. The power comes in with character, but it asks for attention. Throttle control takes a little more thought. Gear changes feel more involved. The ride has personality, but it also asks something from you every mile. Others settle into a rhythm quickly. The engine responds the same way every time. Acceleration feels smooth and controlled. You don't have to think about what the bike is going to do next. It simply does it. That consistency reduces effort, especially over longer stretches. That doesn't make one experience better in every situation. There are moments when raw character feels exactly right. Short rides, open roads, times when you want to feel every pulse of the machine. But over time, especially on longer rides or frequent trips, ease starts to matter more than intensity. You notice it in how long you stay out, in how relaxed you feel when you get back, in whether you're thinking about the ride itself or about managing the machine. That difference shapes your overall experience more than any spec ever could. And once that realization sets in, the bigger picture starts to come into focus. Quiet changes in the garage. It doesn't happen with an announcement. It happens quietly, almost casually. A second bike shows up. Something lighter, easier to manage, simpler to take out without thinking twice. Not as a replacement, not at first, just as an option. That's how it starts. You tell yourself it's for shorter rides, quick runs, maybe something for days when you don't feel like dealing with the full routine. And for a while, both bikes sit there, each with its own purpose. Nothing has changed on the surface. Then patterns begin to form. You reach for the easier machine more often than you expected. Not because it's more exciting, but because it's more convenient. You don't plan the ride as much. You don't think about it as much. You just go. The other bike stays where it is, still respected, still appreciated, but used differently, less frequently, more intentionally. It becomes something you prepare for instead of something you default to. That shift is subtle, but it's consistent. Over time, the balance changes. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough that you start to notice which bike is actually getting the miles. And once you see that pattern clearly, it raises a question that doesn't need to be spoken out loud. That quiet adjustment leads straight into what's happening beyond the garage, what's moving and what's sitting. Spend enough time around dealerships and you start noticing patterns that don't show up in advertisements. Some bikes rotate through inventory quickly. They come in, they get looked at, and they leave. The process feels steady, almost predictable. Others sit longer than expected. They still draw attention. People walk around them. They ask questions. But the final step, the decision to buy, takes longer. Not because the bikes are bad, but because the commitment feels heavier. Salespeople adjust to that reality. They know which models move with less effort and which ones require more conversation. You can see it in how they approach buyers, in how they explain certain bikes versus others. The difference isn't dramatic, but it's there. Inventory tells its own story. Rows that turn over quickly signal confidence. Rows that stay full signal hesitation. Over time, those patterns shape what gets ordered, what gets promoted, and what gets quietly discounted to make space. This isn't about trends on paper, it's about what actually leaves the floor, what people commit to after they've seen everything side by side. That moment of decision reveals more than any brochure ever could. Watching that play out starts to shift how riders think about their own choices. If you want more honest breakdowns like this, subscribe and stay close. No hype, no shortcuts, just real-world riding truth and practical insight that actually matters when it's your money, your time, and your bike on the line. Pride feels different now. Pride used to be tied closely to the badge on the tank. The name carried weight. It told a story before the engine even started. Riders took that seriously, and for good reason. The brand meant something real for a long time. That hasn't disappeared, but it's evolving. Pride still exists, it just shows up differently. Instead of focusing on what the bike represents, more attention goes to how it fits into daily riding, how often it gets used, how easy it is to live with. You start hearing different kinds of conversations, less about image, more about experience. Less about what others see, more about what the rider feels over time. The shift isn't loud. It doesn't come with arguments or debates. It just settles in quietly. Respect is still there, but it's earned in a different way. Not through size or sound alone, but through consistency, through miles, through how naturally a bike becomes part of your routine. That's what stands out more now. This isn't a rejection of the past. It's an adjustment to the present. Riders aren't abandoning what they valued. They're redefining how it applies to the way they ride today. That change sets the stage for something more personal to surface. The thought that creeps in later. It doesn't hit all at once. It shows up gradually in small moments. A ride you skip, a trip you cut short. A thought that lingers longer than it used to. Not frustration, not anger, just awareness. You start comparing what you expected with what's actually happening. Not in a dramatic way, just honestly. You look at how often the bike gets used, how it fits into your routine, whether it still feels as natural as it did in the beginning. There's no need to defend anything at that point. No need to justify the decision. The realization isn't about right or wrong, it's about alignment. Whether the machine still matches the way you want to ride. That's where things shift internally. The conversation moves from outward pride to inward clarity. You stop thinking about what the bike represents and start thinking about what it delivers day after day. It's a quiet process, no big decisions, no sudden changes, just a growing understanding that something doesn't line up the way it once did. And once that understanding settles in, it doesn't really go away. That awareness carries forward, shaping how riders look at the road ahead. The market is already adjusting. You can see it in what manufacturers are building right now. The shift is already happening. Lighter machines are showing up across lineups, lower seat heights, easier handling, simpler designs. Not because companies forgot how to build big bikes, but because they're responding to what riders are actually using. Look at how new models are being positioned. More focus on accessibility, more emphasis on everyday usability. Even the language has changed. Instead of pushing raw size or presence, the message leans toward comfort, control, and consistency. That doesn't happen by accident. Engineering teams pay attention to patterns. They track what sells. But more importantly, they track what gets ridden. Bikes that move regularly, that stay in rotation, that keep riders engaged over time. Those become the blueprint for what comes next. The industry follows behavior, not just tradition. That doesn't mean larger machines disappear. They still have a place, and they always will, but they're no longer the default answer for every rider. They're becoming more specialized, more situational. The center of the market is shifting toward something easier to live with day to day. You can see it in the variety now. More options that prioritize balance over brute presence. More designs that aim to reduce effort instead of amplifying it. The change isn't dramatic, but it's steady. And once it gains momentum, it tends to keep moving in the same direction. That broader adjustment connects directly to something riders are dealing with on a more personal level. Why riders are getting more practical. Costs are rising everywhere, not just in motorcycles. Fuel, insurance, parts, even time itself feels more limited. That pressure changes how decisions get made. You start thinking less about what looks impressive and more about what makes sense over the long run. Practicality isn't about cutting corners. It's about aligning choices with reality. When riding becomes one of several things competing for your time and money, the bike that fits smoothly into that equation stands out more. It doesn't demand as much planning. It doesn't create as many barriers. You begin to evaluate things differently. Not just how a bike feels on a perfect day, but how it fits into an average week. Can you take it out without rearranging everything else? Does it feel like an easy decision or something you have to work toward? That shift isn't forced. It happens naturally as priorities evolve. Riders who have spent years on the road start recognizing patterns. They know what holds up over time and what becomes harder to justify. Experience shapes that perspective. Value starts to mean something more specific. Not just what you get when you buy, but what you get every time you ride. The return isn't measured in features or numbers. It's measured in how often the bike becomes part of your routine without resistance. That practical mindset feeds into a deeper change that goes beyond cost or convenience. What a real bike means now. For a long time, the definition felt fixed. A real bike had to be big. It had to sound a certain way. It had to carry a presence that everyone recognized. That idea shaped how riders judged machines, and, in many ways, how they judged each other. That definition hasn't disappeared, but it's being reworked, slowly without much noise. The focus is shifting towards something more grounded. A real bike is starting to mean something that works, something that holds up, something that invites you to ride more often instead of less. The change shows up in small ways. Conversations that used to center around image now lean toward experience. Riders talk about how a bike fits into their life, not just how it looks parked. They compare miles, not just features. They notice what lasts. Respect follows that shift. It's no longer tied only to size or sound. It comes from consistency, from reliability, from how naturally a machine becomes part of your routine. That kind of respect doesn't need to be announced. It's understood. There's still room for the old definition. There always will be. It still carries weight for riders who value that tradition and everything tied to it. And that connection is not going anywhere anytime soon. But it's no longer the only standard. What matters has expanded, and that shift is quietly reshaping how riders make choices going forward today. All of that leads to a conclusion that has been sitting there the entire time, waiting to be recognized. The truth that was there all along. When everything settles down, the answer isn't complicated. It never was. The best bike isn't the one that draws the most attention. It's the one that fits into your life without resistance. The one that feels natural to take out, not something you have to build toward. A machine that removes friction changes everything. You don't think about riding as much, you just do it. Short trips turn into longer ones. Occasional rides become regular habits. The experience stays consistent, and that consistency builds connection over time. On the other side, when a bike asks more from you than you expected, the relationship shifts. Not immediately, not in a dramatic way, but gradually. You start weighing each ride differently. You consider effort, timing, conditions. The decision becomes more deliberate. That difference defines ownership more than anything else. Not the badge, not the numbers, not the reputation, just the simple question of whether the bike invites you to ride or makes you think twice. Everything else falls behind that. It doesn't take a major event to see it. It shows up in how often the bike leaves the garage, how easy it feels to take it out, and how naturally it becomes part of your routine without effort. You don't plan it, you just ride. Because everything about the machine works with you instead of against you. day after day. That's where the real value sits. Not in what impresses people standing still, but in what keeps you riding, without hesitation. The more a bike fits into your life, the more it earns its place, mile after mile, without you ever having to justify it. So the real question is not which bike looks better in the parking lot. It is which one keeps getting ridden when the excitement fades and real life takes over. That is where this whole argument lands. If you found this useful or it made you rethink a few things, hit like, subscribe for more real-world breakdowns, and drop your take below. Are you still all in on Harley? Or are you starting to see why bikes like the Rebel are gaining ground?